All right, we are here with our editor extraordinaire, Dan Ackerman, who covers basically all things Mac, all things laptop across the industry, and also the author of The Tetris Effect. Mr. Dan Ackerman, thanks for coming in.
Great to be here.
And that plug for your book was deliberate, and we'll talk about that a little later. But what everyone wants to talk about really is the new MacBook Pros with the touch bars, and I guess also without. You've had a chance to spend extensive time on it, and we really want to just get your in-depth, feel review. What is the overall take on these guys? First of all,
I mean, these are brand new MacBook Pros. They may look very similar to the ones they're replacing, but when we first got our exclusive early hands-on access to them several days before they were actually announced, the thing that struck me the most when they first pulled the little cloth off them at Apple's Cupertino headquarters was that they were much more different than I expected. Literally everything about them is different. The actual size of them, the keyboard is different, the screen is a little bit different, the touchpad is very different, the connections are different, and obviously the fact that you can get this touch bar is different, and the components are different.
Is it different for good, or you've been with it now, again, your first impression, are these differences better, or is it take a step back, or maybe in different areas they work to its advantage and disadvantage?
In general, it's a pretty sizable step forward, if in part because the MacBook Pro line hasn't really had a serious redesign in about 4 years. So bringing them up to modern standards does feel like a big jump. Now, there are a couple of areas where it's awesome. The touch bar is really cool. The giant trackpad, the pads on them are twice as big as they were on the previous models. That's awesome. Screen's brighter, obviously thinner and lighter. Those are all pluses. There are a couple of changes that you may have more mixed feelings about. The primary one, of course, being they got rid of every port except for these USB Type-C ports, which are now for power for everything. So no more MagSafe. Even you have to just use USB-C for that. They did keep the headphone jack. That survived this round of cuts. We'll see what happens next time. So Apple doesn't hate headphone jacks in everything, just in the phones. And the other thing that's a little more subtle is they've changed the keyboard. It's much closer to the very flat keyboard on the 12-inch MacBook. They call that a butterfly-style mechanism because of that's how the keys go down. There's like a butterfly underneath.
People that are listening and can't see you, I'm just going to pretend that his hands moved in a butterfly, like a butterfly. Like, there you go. Butterflies in the sky.
So it's not quite as flat as the one on the 12-inch MacBook, but it takes some getting used to. And frankly, if you're like an all-day, everyday typist, you may never love it.
So Dan, I want to kind of break down some of those individual things you talked about because there is really a lot to talk about. The touch bar. When I first saw it, I was like, I think I'll use it for some things, not for everything, and I really don't know how people are going to use it. You are, no matter what, going to be forced to use it because it has some of those, main general functions like volume and brightness on it just from a day-to-day thing. But what was really your overall take on the touch bar?
Yeah, I'll show it to you real fast right here. I've got the 15-inch right here, and here's the touch bar, and you can see it right above the keyboard. So it's sort of like, in this case, it's monochromatic, so it doesn't really jump out at you. It replaces the function keys, and frankly, the function keys were replaced many, many years ago and made, brightness and contrast and muting and reloading and things like that, rather than what they were originally for, which was basically some terminal commands that nobody uses them for. So why would we keep these old keys labeled F1, F2 when, that doesn't even mean anything? So I get that. By default, it does a lot of the same things. So you can tap on the volume button and the brightness button and things like that. You don't get that tactile feedback you get from clicking the button. So it's more of a look than a do it by feel, at least until maybe you memorize exactly where on the keyboard it is. But the thing that it does really nicely is it adapts to what you're doing. So if you launch Safari, you get a different set of buttons on there. If you launch iTunes or Photos or Messages or any other Apple app, you get a different set of buttons. Right now, it's Apple apps. Later, Photoshop will come and other apps. For now, it's all Apple stuff. So if we don't use those, it's not going to be as useful. But I do like how it adapts. Like if I'm in Safari and I have a bunch of tabs open, it shows me little tiny thumbnails of all the tabs, and I can just tap on them to switch between them instead of mousing up and clicking on the tabs in the browser on my screen.
Did you find it made overall, did it make the experience more efficient, less efficient, or sometimes better, sometimes not helpful? What did you find out?
I think you nailed it exactly right there. It's about efficiency. It's not going to like knock your socks off and change your life. It shaves a couple of keystrokes off here and there, and frankly, that actually counts for a lot
Hmm.
sometimes. Like if you want to go to the address bar in Safari, what do you hit Command L and then you type it in. Here on the touch bar, you just tap the touch bar and then you're right in the address bar. So you went from 2 taps to 1. That may not sound like a lot, but I started doing that immediately and I never looked back.
That's great.
Instinctually, you pick up a couple of these little shortcuts and you go, "Oh, that's awesome," and then you're just doing them like that.
And that's kind of what we've seen in the past from Apple, right? It's really that's why I was curious about your experience. It's coming down to changing your behavior, and is the experience good enough to change your behavior? And from what you're telling me, it is.
I think anytime you give somebody, a set of keyboard commands or a set of mouse clicks, and you can find a way to shave a couple off that, you're going to naturally, your brain will gravitate towards the easier way to do it. And there's fun stuff too, like in messages, which everybody uses because it ties into the messages on your phone. There's just a big control strip of emojis,
Oh,
and you
I
can
know
just
you like
scroll
that, Dan
through 'em.
Ackerman. I know you like the
I like that.
emojis.
Little Dan Jr. likes that because he sends me dozens or hundreds of freaking emojis every day on his mother's phone. He's like, send daddy emojis. And I can never get anything done because they just keep popping up on my screen, just like no words, just emojis because he's
I
five.
think that sounds like all of our lives, quite honestly, whether you have children or not.
It's our favorite form of nonverbal communication, now better than ever.
Also, the trackpad. You seem to point that out specifically because of its larger size. How did that make using the MacBook Pro better for you? Or if were there any drawbacks as well? I'd like to hear both sides of the coin.
Yeah, according to Apple, at least, what they want you to do is rather than having a touch screen on the screen itself, where your hand could cover it up and get in the way. And that's how they feel Windows touchscreen laptops work. Your hand is always in the way. They have the touch bar on top and they have the big touchpad below it. And they envision you sort of combining those two to form a sort of secondary screen experience that's not a touch screen but is kind of close, because that's what this really is. It's a second display built into your laptop. It's just a really skinny one. I will say it's an OLED display, which is that kind of screen we find in the highest end TV. So it looks pretty awesome.
Does the actual OLED touch bar quality wise actually look better than the actual screen? Like, does it shine bright? Like, what do you think?
It's bright. It's when it has colors on it, the colors really pop. It doesn't do enough graphically for you to really say, "Oh, I'd watch a movie on this if it was a little bit bigger." But the screen itself, is perfectly fine. It's the same resolution as the previous MacBook Pro, which is the Retina higher res, not quite 4K, but better than full HD. However, Apple says it's 25% brighter, and it is definitely brighter. And they say it has a wider color range. That's again playing catch up because so many high-end Windows computers are now adding higher resolution screens up to 4K, and a lot of them are doing, P3 color and sRGB and just these wider color gamuts. So in some sense it's catch up, but in another sense, the MacBook is so predominant, especially in the creative industries. It's almost like the industry isn't really there until Apple does it.
You hit upon two things, and I wanted to follow up with that. You touched upon the touch screen. What is your take? We know what Apple says and what Apple wants to do. You've been around Surface devices from the beginning. Do you wish Apple actually incorporates some of this? And I know it requires them to actually have a different OS to support this, but does it still feel like they're a little behind, or it's okay?
It's a weird philosophical question, and you're exactly right when you say, does macOS need a touchscreen as it is, or do they need a new operating system that is a touchscreen one? I feel on a Windows computer, you kind of do need a touchscreen, at least to get like a really good, smooth experience. But is that because we've trained ourselves to be touch people with phones and tablets and other devices, so we just naturally want to touch everything? Or is it because Windows is just so naturally clunky, especially in Windows 8, which we just replaced, that you just needed that touchscreen to just swipe stuff in easily without going through, all the different Windows menus? That's an interesting philosophical question. I'm not sure we have an answer to it. Apple says they don't see combining, the touchscreen stuff, the phones and the tablets with the computer stuff anytime in the near to medium future, which I think they call out as, 10, 15, 20 years. For them, at least for now, those are resolutely separate. This is, however, one way of adding touchscreen to a laptop without making it a touchscreen laptop.
But what do you think personally? Like, what do you? Because look, you have kids, right? I have nieces and nephews. They touch everything. It's like ingrained in just how we're interacting with anything with a screen. So I'm just curious, what do you think personally? Like, do you want to see something like that, or is it important, or is it not important?
I mean, that's exactly right. And it is about, dare I say, it's all about the children, which is just completely true. Every little kid I know, they see a MacBook, they run up and they start touching the screen right away. I occasionally find myself just going, oh, yeah, let me scroll down this. Oh, that doesn't work.
Exactly.
Dinosaurs like myself, we can still handle a non-touch computer. But once my generation has passed from the earth, the young people will demand touch in everything, and they won't be wrong. They'll be too busy talking in emojis only and no actual language, so we won't be able to understand them. But they will demand touch in some pictogram form.
Yeah, again, we'll see how it plays out, and it is really a philosophical thing, and I think even our viewers and listeners and tech fans, some lean on one side versus the other as well. You hear a lot of people lean towards, oh, just give me a Mac touchscreen. I mean, I feel that way because I only could imagine, oh, if you give me this Windows experience but with the Mac flavor, that, oh man, that would just be like amazing. But we'll see how that happens. You also touched upon creatives, and this is one of those debates that initially came out. The MacBook Pro, is it really more for a consumer? We know creatives will still stick with the Mac platform for now, but a lot of creatives were bemoaning the lack of the ports now. We got to go dongle. We got to go full dongle now, where it may not necessarily be the most powerful, raw power machine. The solid state drives are extremely fast, but as a creative, are they could this be a point where they're actually at least considering transitioning to a different platform? Not yet doing it, but seriously considering it based on what they've seen.
Well, you're right, Brian. You never go full dongle. Everybody knows. Never go full dongle.
Never, never.
You always hear complaints about every new Mac line or Mac product, especially from the creative people who make up such a huge chunk of that audience. And you know what? They're the ones paying these very high prices for these devices. So you should definitely listen to what they have to say. That said, I had an artist in here the other day demoing some other hardware, and he said, this Windows thing I'm trying out, this is really cool, but I've been so invested in the Mac ecosystem for 10 plus years. I'm not just going to switch just because something else has a cool feature that this doesn't have. It's more of a holistic approach. So I don't think they're going to lose those guys. In the near future. The USB-C and dongle thing is annoying. I rarely find myself plugging anything into a laptop anymore. They did lower the price on those dongles. It's not an excuse, but it's something.
$6.
It's something
Save $6, Dan. Save $6.
That's right. That's right. And they want you to plug into like these special USB-C connected monitors from LG that are very expensive. I'll give them credit for one thing. It's not proprietary. USB-C is something you see in a lot of new high-end Windows laptops as well. At least they didn't go with some weird proprietary plug that only they can make.
Okay, another practical question. We know that the iPhone can sync wirelessly to your computer, but is it just curious that you can't physically, unless you have a dongle, connect your phone to your actual laptop? I know people still do that, not everyone, but there's still a good amount of people that just do that.
That's true, and I think I have a Lightning to USB-C dongle sitting around somewhere. Maybe those will become more commonplace. I personally don't do the phone to computer connection. It just doesn't add anything for me, and iTunes just gets all weird as it does for everyone. People are going to complain about this for a long time, and people are going to complain about not having a headphone jack in the iPhone 7 for a long time. Maybe they'll retrench. Maybe they'll add a regular USB back. But that USB Type A that everybody uses, it was a great invention 20 years ago. I think it's literally just about at its 20th anniversary. I asked last year for CNET magazine. I wrote a story about USB-C and its evolution, and I asked AJ Bott from Intel, who was one of the inventors of the USB spec 20 years ago. I said, when you take that plug and you plug it in, what is your lifetime percentage, Mr. Inventor of USB, on plugging that plug in the right way and not having to go, I got to turn it over and go like this? And he said to me in all earnestness, he said, well, I guess about 50%. And I said, that cannot be true. I have a 0% lifetime batting average of this. Therefore, no one even gets close to 50%. There's something about it. Every time it just goes the wrong way. God bless USB-C. There is no wrong way.
There is no wrong way with USB-C. So overall, how do you view this laptop? We know that the reviews are out now. What's your kind of closing statement about it? Who's it for, and who it'll appeal to?
I mean, they're awesome laptops. They're definitely a big step forward in terms of design, in terms of power. The touch bar is very cool. It's a want. It's not a have. I think a lot of people are going to go for this guy I have right here in my hand.
The
This is
13-inch
the
bad boy.
13-inch model without the touch bar. So it's still got the traditional function key row, and that is the entry-level model in a sense. That is $14.99, which is still kind of expensive. It's basically the previous entry-level 13-inch Pro with double the hard drive storage. So that's why it's $14.99. If you want that touch bar, then that jumps up to $17.99, which is bonkers. For a
For a
13-inch
13-inch
laptop, it's
laptop.
really nice, but
Come on.
wow. And then this 15-inch guy, this is awesome. Don't get me wrong. It's got every 15-inch now has discrete AMD graphics in it. It's got that huge screen. Again, they all have the touch bar. They all have quad-core 6th-gen Intel Core i processors. So, awesome stuff all around. That 15-inch starts at $23.99.
See, and look, I know you're saying this, right? You know what is competitive from a price point in the landscape of the market. You personally, are you able to comment on what would you actually, whether you're in the market to upgrade or not, would you personally buy this MacBook right now, or is the price a little like,
The thing that really makes people invest more in these MacBooks, and I totally understand this, is if I buy this, aluminum unibody $1,500 MacBook, I could actually get away with using it for 5 years and it'll still pretty much work. It's tough to say that about even other brand premium laptops, that you're going to be able to use it as your work machine for 5 or more years. So I understand that, especially because if you need it serviced, the Apple Store, you know what? They do a pretty good job, especially if you have Apple Care. They're not going to leave you totally in the lurch. I've had very good experiences there, just walking in cold. When you have a premium laptop from another company, you may pay several $100s less for. Go back in 3 years and try to get them to service it, and they're like, "We don't even make these anymore. What is that?"
No, you know what? I think that's a great point that people don't think about, just the longevity of the machine sometimes. Because also some people are in that mind space of like, oh, I'll just buy it for a year or two and then I'll sell it on eBay when the next one comes out, right? We're around that quote unquote tech person is kind of like that, but not everyone is like that, right? This is a machine that they want 3, 4, 5 years. So that's a great point. Also, one thing that stuck out when I saw the new MacBook Pros, I honestly, when we watched the keynote, we couldn't really tell, but they're really thin, compared to, they just look so much thinner. Do you feel that Apple really kind of made more of a priority to make this a thinner machine as one of those top 3 flagship tentpole, these are the 3 things that we want to bring the new MacBook Pro. I feel like just making it thinner was one of those things because they're so in love with the idea of making everything as thin as possible.
Oh, of course they are. And design is such a huge choice because a laptop in particular is such a personal choice. You take it with you places, you're seen in public with it, you work on it. It's probably the device you may use most, often during the day in terms of actual man hours on it. Now, that said, I'm going to disagree with you a tiny bit, Brian.
Please do.
These are thinner. These are thinner, but they are not the thinnest. The 13-inch is still, I think, 14.9 millimeters. That's very thin. Don't get me wrong, but there are a ton of new Windows.
Oh, yeah.
13-inch laptops that get down to 12 millimeters, 11. They get down under 10 millimeters. Acer's got the Swift 7. That's a 13-inch. Really nice premium 13-inch laptop. Roughly comparable to the MacBook. And it's 9.98 millimeters thick. That's insane.
Damn.
So these things are, they're thin, but you're not going like, oh, this is the thinnest laptop ever. And they're still, 3-4 pounds. So they still feel kind of. They feel kind of dense, but at the same time, that means you feel like they'll take a beating, and that's the one thing MacBooks have always done well is you can throw them in your bag and knock them around. You may get a little scratch or dent, but I've never beaten one up in 10+ years enough that it stops working.
Yeah. Overall, all things considered, where would you rank the new MacBook Pro? Let's say 15-inch amongst other laptops. Like, do you still feel there's a certain 1 or 2 that are better than it, or they're pretty even? Like, where do you put in the pecking order because you look at everything?
Yeah, I mean, it's still the top of the game, but it's a very expensive top of the game. If you don't want to spend that much, there's other things you could look at. Dell's XPS line is very good. Their XPS 15 is pretty much a MacBook Pro clone. There are a lot of other, cool 13-inch super thin laptops out there, but they're thinner, but they're not quite as powerful. I think what Apple does really well that everyone else has a hard time wrapping their hands around is that integration of the hardware and the operating system and the software and the user input, that magical trackpad that no one else can get that feel on, that flick your fingers around it kind of feel. The touch bar, it's a nice bonus. I wouldn't go too far out of my way for it, but as long as you're getting one of these and it comes with it, that's cool, and you'll find it fun. You'll find a couple of efficiencies and cool things to do with it. But I think people buy MacBooks primarily for the ease of use and that trackpad, and nobody else does that.
That's a great point. And then before we wrap up, Dan, if you could just talk a little bit about the Tetris effect. We want to show you some love with just some of the other things that you're doing as well.
Well, thank you, Brian. I wish I had a copy here. I can hold it. That is my
we can
new
Photoshop it in, bro.
It is the true life nonfiction story of the secret Cold War history of the most important video game ever created, Tetris, created in the Soviet Union in the 80s and stolen by Western companies. Cold War spy hijinks for real ensue.
Well, there you go. I mean, you can't tease it any better than that.
Thank you, sir. And featured in the upcoming issue of CNET magazine. You can read an excerpt in the winter issue of CNET's print magazine.
Keep the plugs coming. Cha-ching, cha-ching. All right, Dan. Hey, we just appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you so much. And we will talk to you soon, my friend.
My pleasure as always.
All right, thanks.